Hello and welcome to another edition of In the Spotlight with Lee Ellery. Joining me today is Julian John, the founder and managing director of Delsion. I wonder, Julian, if you could tell me a bit about your journey to start with, and then we can develop it from there.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. Where do we start? Because there's journeys and there's journeys. So my original work background is in human resources and learning development. So recruitment, the people side of things, training, and I was fortunate to do that for a number of years. And I suppose what I got out of that is the opportunities at every turn to understand what potential is and how potential can be supported within the workplace. They're the real key things for me, and they're, I suppose, the things that used to get me out of bed in the morning and get me excited to be within the workplace. And I was fortunate to work at a fairly senior level within some of the things that I did. And through everything that I've done, one of the focuses I've always had to be inclusive.
Yeah.
And things sort of took a bit of a change in 2005 because I was driving home from seeing my mother-in-law here in Swansea with my wife. We'd been married about a year. I was driving down the M4. I was doing about 70 odd miles an hour, and I thought I'd run over something. I thought I'd hit something. And I pulled over to the hard shoulder. I got out of the car to make sure the car was all right. And what I discovered fairly quickly was that the car was fine, but I wasn't. So everything was spinning, I couldn't stand. I was taken to hospital, and they said, you've got a balance issue. Your balance has gone, but it'll last about 6 weeks and then it'll go. 2.5 years later, I was still housebound, and things had got progressively worse to the ends where anything visual I struggled with. I couldn't get them downstairs. I developed a very severe stutter. I became very, any loud noises, I was very sensitive to sound. And said, housebound for, 2.5 years before I was eventually diagnosed with an acquired brain injury. And I went through 5 years of what's called vestibular rehabilitation therapy to learn to stand, walk and talk again. And at that point, recognised as disabled. And from everything that I've done previously, I knew the solution to get out of all these problems was just get back to work. All I wanted to do was get back into the workplace, and I suddenly found that there were surmountable barriers as a disabled person to getting into work. I was 9 years long-term unemployed. I arrived in Swansea from Cardiff, homeless with my wife, because we had lost everything, didn't know where to go. And I thought, well, that can't be right from wanting to see as much potential in the workplace as possible. So I set up Delsion in order to try and make Wales a leading nation for inclusion within the workplace, but in order to reframe the conversation that sits around disability within the workplace. Yeah. So I think it needs to be reframed.
I think you've done the right thing, because there's not many organisations like yours around doing what you're doing. And the thing is, you're on your social media platforms and things that I've looked up in researching you. You're all about inclusion. You eat, sleep and breathe inclusion all the time for disabled people, and I think that's a good way to be.
And it's but we've got to try and I think there's so many myths, so many complications around things, and I don't think people are open enough to try and take the time to understand. So I'll give you a really simple example, seeing as we're based here, is that I did some work experience to try and get back into work with an employability company organisation that's just across the road. And I've spent 20 odd years in retail. I've recruited over 2,500 people. I always remember there was someone there who was trying to get into a retail role. And from all my experience, there was no barrier for why that person couldn't get into work. But he struggled and struggled and struggled. And it's those are the things where we want to try and get things where there's improvement. Just this greater understanding. Things are improving. We can't say they're not. No. But we keep on talking about the disability employment gap, which is the difference between non-disabled and disabled people in work, and it doesn't move. Hasn't moved for the last 10 years, hasn't moved for the last 20 years.
No.
We need a shift to make that happen.
And this brings me on to what you're doing now, especially with the show trust, the Disability Power 100. That's a really good initiative, because I know myself and you have both appeared on the list in 2022. You appeared on the list a year previously, if I remember, when we were talking, you told me. And I think that's a good initiative in itself, because it's recognised throughout not just Wales, but it's world renowned, I think.
It is, and I said I've been really fortunate to be listed on it a couple of times previously. And in fact, last year I went to the awards event, and I looked around at the room, and again, go back to this word potential. So many people there, and I came out of there, absolutely thrilled to be part of it, and just so great to see what was going on. But I spoke to the Show Trust and said, I don't want to be included again. I don't want to be on the list again. I said, because I've been on it before, and I don't want to take the opportunity away from somebody else to be on the list. So I'm being fortunate enough. They said, that's fair enough, because we probably weren't going to invite you anyway. But joking aside, but you can be, we wanted to be a judge. But it's things like that which put people into the limelight, but into this wider realms, so people have got more chance to understand again what's out there. The other thing that I've been involved in previously as well is the Purple Light Up. Which on December the 3rd for International Day of People with Disabilities. And again, both that and the Show Trust, the Power 100, is about the positive contribution that disabled people make. I'm really fed up of this negative piece that sits around it, where there's always extra cost, extra time, lack of ability, whatever it may be. No, we just have to change all that and just keep on focusing on the positive
I think this is why, as well, I decided, along with Swan TV and especially Mike, when he approached me, this is why that I decided to do a show like this, to start talking about the negative things and the positive, and trying to come up with a solution that fits everything.
Absolutely, and it is platforms such as this is where the real opportunities lie. We just need to. I used to have a phrase which I've changed, which we need to keep talking about it until we don't have to talk about it anymore. And I think that's true, but I think there's also an element of we need to keep talking about it till we see the actions, so we don't have to talk about it anymore. But this is, as I said, this is just a conversation between two people which will inform others.
And do you find as well, I know I find it as a disability activist, is people always say, why do you do it? I do it because I like doing it and I like helping others. Do you get the same feeling as that when you achieve something?
Yes, absolutely. I've also got 2 children, both with disabled, so I look at regards to what their future's about. But do you know when you know something's absolutely right, when you know that something is absolutely not even the right thing to do, but just right? And I tend to wake up every morning thinking, well, no, this is just common sense. I don't understand. Although there's a legacy with all the issues, etc., I don't understand why we keep on having these conversations and facing the same issues again, because it's just common sense, a lot of this stuff is. And it's, as I said, from my experiences, from other experiences, it is changing, and things like what you're doing are some of the elements that are going to make change.
And I think we've got to make change as well in governmental level as well, especially with the Welsh Government work that I'm doing with the Disability Rights Task Force and Jane Hart and her role. I think if we don't approach the policy makers in government, then nothing's going to change.
No, you're absolutely right. But the key part of that is the old adage, isn't it? There's nothing for us without us.
Yeah.
So it's how we're consulted, how we have an input, how we can take these ideas forward. And it's great to have something which lasts as a focus for 12 months. This has got to be lifetimes worth of works. And this has got to be creating a foundation. And I've said that with regards to Delsion, we've got this social goal to make Wales the leading nation for inclusion, specifically around disability within the workplace. That's not a bit of fluff we can stick on there because it looks good on a website. It is genuinely absolutely achievable because, as you said, we have got elements like the Welsh Government, we have got Disability Wales, we have got a number of organisations engaged around this. We are a smaller country, so we can be more agile. And also, and you've heard the old expression in regards to the 6 degrees of separation. Yeah. Well, there's only 2 in Wales because the majority of us know each other. So if we can't get things done on this platform, and
when can we?
Yeah, and we'd like to be able to see that and say, look, we can be a model for the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And that's where that's what I do when I sit down on a Saturday night and thinking, oh, what does the future look like?
Do you have any dreams that you may want to see in the future? If you were questioned on.
It goes back to the kids again. I just want them to live in an environment where it's just not even thought of. It's just people are accepted on an equitable basis as individuals for who they are.
Yeah.
I suppose that would be my key thing that I'd love to see to take forward.
I think myself and you, knowing, I think my background and yours is quite similar, and I think that's what I would want as well. So I'm glad we're thinking on the same page.
But there's also the opportunity for all of us to come together. I think that's the key thing. So I think some of the numbers that sit around the populations now show that as a united group of people all taking things forward and sharing our thoughts, experiences and knowledge, then there's a huge opportunity to make some positive changes.
Do you think the Equality Act has diluted the DDA?
That's an interesting question. And what I think we need to have is a wider understanding of what the Equality Act is. I think we need to have an understanding of the Equality Act pulled together loads of different areas of legislation, loads of different, the Sex Discrimination Act, Disability Discrimination Act, for example, in order to have an overriding act which in some views makes it easier to access and bring actions under that act together. I think what we also need to be mindful of is that there's not so much knowledge around there, so we just treat equality as a whole, whereas specifically where there is something that sits around disability discrimination, we need to understand and ensure that the Equality Act is as powerful as the DDA was to be able to make some actions again there. And when you go through employment tribunal or take action against the Equality Act, it's only at the very end, once a decision has been made, whether you question the decision, whether we get into those very fine lines of what the legislation is. Yeah. But I think we just need to have this understanding that it is there to protect us, and it is there to protect equally around discrimination as well as anything else.
How do we approach what you just said then? What's the best way of combating that, do you think?
There's loads of examples of case law out there, so it's always good to highlight the case law and where there's changes around there, because that's one area that is fairly well read within the area. And again, it's just more information that sits around it, just more knowledge of what it sits there. So, but I've got a question for you.
You got one for me?
I've got a question for you. So, I've spoken a lot about my background and all the bits and pieces that I'm doing, but I'm genuinely interested because Swansea TV is a fantastic platform for all of this, which we've said. You're the absolute driving force around it. I know all the other bits and pieces that you do just to make a huge contribution as well, but can you share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, I've got a disability called cerebral palsy, quadriplegic, which affects the 4 limbs of my body, but I always say that it doesn't stop me doing what I want to do every day. I started campaigning for disability rights going back to 2003, when it was the International Congress of Disabled People. And it was back then we had the conference of disabled people from all over the world, and it was during that week that I began to feel that I need to make changes in society for people in Wales in particular, because we're talking about all over the world here. But what came across to me during that week-long event in Swansea University was the fact that disabled people, no matter what country they were in, no matter what problems they had, no matter what language they spoke, all of our issues were the same. They were the same, and we built up relationships with different countries while we were still coming down from the, like, enjoy the week and things like that. But the fact is, I wanted to make a change in Wales after that. So I spoke with people in the Welsh government around the table and told them about, because they funded part of it as well.
Right.
So I told them about what we'd done during the conference and how beneficial it was to us all to be in the same room and talking about these issues. And I just built up a relationship with the policymakers, which I've still got today. And I've actually got one of them coming on to a future edition of the show with me.
Great.
To talk more about this very, very topic. But what I will say, just to finish it off, is if it wasn't for myself and maybe a group of us, I don't think we'd be where we are today, because it's disabled people themselves trying to make the change for others after them. Because I saw a post today on Facebook from one of my other colleagues who works with me on Welsh government stuff, and I replied to the comment saying that I enjoy work, I enjoy doing the voluntary work, but it shouldn't be down to just the chosen few. Everyone should be involved in the work, because at the end of the day, we're working towards something now in 2024, which is the new Disability Rights Action Plan.
Yeah.
Well, some of the disabled people who we questioned in the past may not be involved later on down the line. So it's about bringing new people, new blood into work with us now, rather than leave them out of the loop, for me.
Yeah, definitely. As I said, we need that wider engagement, and it's sometimes something that we tend to miss. So, but I just want to say thank you for everything that you've done, and thank you for everything you're doing, because you're a driving force around it. So it's great to see.
Thank you, Julian, and looking forward to working with you maybe in the future on some collaborative work, I would say.
Absolutely, looking forward to it.
Because I think we've got a lot in common.
Definitely.
Well, thank you, Julian, for joining me today. It's been an insightful interview, and I know, without even saying to Mike, can we work with you in the future? I know we are going to work together in the future. So I look forward to it and wish you all the best for the future.
Thank you so much.
Well, that's the end of another edition of In the Spotlight with Lee Ellery. Hope you've enjoyed this episode as much as I have. And we look forward to seeing you again soon.